jump on when they're ready. I'll record this and post it. I think I have one more. I think I have one to post, not for this class, but for the other class. So I just wanted to double check with everybody if you received the email with the schedule for the EDUC 511 tested measurements class.
I received it.
Okay. So just
the updated schedule.
Right.
Is that what you're, yeah, I got that. Thank you.
So it has the date, the start date for 511, because I know there was a little confusion because they have a different date online. It does start the 6th of July and ends, I don't remember the date, toward the end of July. It's a 3-week class. The only class that's 5 weeks in the summer is of this class, the 661 class. And I have asked IT to keep this class open. Hi, Carter. So Carter, I was just talking, I have sent an email to IT about keeping this class and the 607 class open longer, because I know that some people had difficulty getting enrolled just because of some delays to COVID. So I don't think that will be a problem. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
But in case anybody was wondering, if for some reason, because I've talked to a couple people that are getting assignments in a little bit later because of late enrollment or getting enrolled late by admissions. So just let me know if you have a problem getting any assignments posted and I can take care of that. But right now, they told me it would be open until July 1st, but I've asked for an extension of that. And that shouldn't be a problem because the grad program is different from the undergrad program. But just let me know if you have any difficulties. I've gone through most of the assignments and responded to a lot of them. Everybody seems to be keeping good pace. I have posted the final exam. So at any time you think you're ready, you may open the final exam. There is a parameter on there. I give you 5 hours to take the exam, but you do not have to take it in one sitting. I think I talked about this before. You may break it up. You just have to put your start time and stop time. And the reason I limit it to 5 hours is because one year I did not do that. And grad students tend to have a little bit of an A-type personality. And I just got, some students would say, I've been working on this for 12 hours. And I was like, oh, no. You don't need to put, that many hours into it. So you do need to prep for it. And if you have good notes, and you might want to save your notes to one location so you can have easy access to them, and you want to have your books available to you, because if you take something from a book and use it, or from any of the information online, I do just want you to cite it, and you just put the author and the date, okay? If it's from one of these lectures, then you just put Schindler and the date of well, they're not really lectures, but meetings, okay? And just, you may not cut and paste from the internet. I usually don't have a problem with that at the graduate level, but it's in the directions of the final exam. The final exam is all essay response kinds of things, and there's a case study. There's 2 case studies, you choose one case study. Okay? You really should have no problem finishing it within 5 hours. If you have accommodations, I'm aware of that, and I know what accommodations you have, so you just apply those as needed, okay? And that's really no big deal. But just make sure that you're concise and detailed enough so I know what you're talking about. If it asks for, a lot of it is applying your knowledge. It's not really regurgitation of information. It's more of, I'll say, what would you do as a teacher if this occurred, okay? And then the case studies, you have to read through those, and it's basically you're trying to take a bunch of information and then answer the questions at the end of the case study. I use a lot of case studies to evaluate student's application of the knowledge. I'm really looking that you can apply, you can synthesize and evaluate information. It's not so much regurgitation. It's, as a teacher, can you go to a source and get the information you need to then to apply it to a situation with a student. I don't think you'll be surprised by anything that is on the final exam. If you have a question about the final or you're confused about my wording on a question, please just email me and I can clarify. All right. Any particular questions about the final? No? Good. Any questions in general about something that you have read? No, everything's,
So I do
Yeah.
have a question. So for
Yes.
the notes, when you're checking the notes, how much are you like reading into them to see how like detailed they are, and how much are you just checking to make sure that we've taken notes, right?
I will open them and scan them for information, but I don't really analyze your notes, right? Because they're your notes. Sometimes if the notes are not too detailed, I'll say you might want to think about adding notes. For instance, most of the resources you need, you can find in the books here, but when you start in the fall, sometimes I'll say, these notes are fine, but you might want to add when you take notes in the fall classes, you might want to add some more details, because it's very different when you're taking one class or two classes at a time. But when you hit the fall schedule and you're taking 4 classes at a time, you're going to want probably more detailed notes, right? And I also know a lot of the other professors and kind of the detail that they're looking for. And all the faculty that teach will give you tips on notes and things. So I'm not grading the notes very, very carefully. I do skim through the notes. I look for key words, key phrases. If I see notes that are just 1 or 2 sentences, I'll probably say, you might want to take a few more notes, because if you got to an exam and say you only have 5 hours and you've got to go read 3 chapters because you didn't have enough notes to answer the question, then it's just going to take you longer. I don't think there are any faculty that give in the grad program that do multiple choice. We really do higher level application, analysis, synthesis types of things. A lot of papers, and basically just demonstrating that you have the skill to find information and to make a good argument.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Let me go to, I'm looking for something over here that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. On the autism module, any comments about working with children on the autism spectrum? Most of the children that you're probably going to work with the general curriculum special ed license are children on the autism spectrum, children with specific learning disabilities, children with emotional disabilities, and some behavior disabilities. Those, Virginia doesn't really have a classification for behavior disorders or disabilities, but they kind of clump all of that under emotional disabilities. I've worked in states where they're different. There's children are classified as having emotional disabilities, or children are classified as having behavioral issues. And both can qualify for special ed services. I kind of like that, because emotional disabilities come with a certain different need than children with behavioral disorders or disabilities, right? So emotional disabilities are much more involved, requires a higher level of clinical care, usually with child psychologists or child psychiatrists, where behavior issues can often be addressed with the special education teacher, with other specialists in the school. But Virginia clumps them all together. So that's just to be aware of that. Has anybody worked with children on the autism spectrum or have experience?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
Okay.
children behavior program. Yes.
Now, Lindsay, are you trained in applied behavior?
Yeah, so I'm doing a postmaster's certificate in applied behavior analysis.
Okay,
That's my specialization area in my doctoral program.
great.
So, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and share some information on applied behavior analysis?
Well, yeah, I guess sure. Okay. Let's see. So I think everybody's probably heard of behavioral psychology, and and if you've had an intro to psychology class, you may have heard of B.F. Skinner and the ideas of all the principles of reinforcement and how that ties into learning
Mhm.
and behavior change. And so ABA is a science-based approach to behavior change. And what behavior analysts do is come in and observe children and make behavioral assessments of what comes before a problematic behavior,
Mhm.
and then what can come after that. And then we take data and measure the change of behavior by manipulating the what we call the antecedents, the things
Right.
for it, and then the consequences.
Mhm.
So ABA is becoming more commonly used in schools.
Mhm.
The little local county where I work has a behavior program and behavior analysts, but then the larger city of Winchester, in which I live, doesn't have behavior programs and hire behavior analysts. So it's kind of all over the place.
Right.
We actually, just before school closed, had a group come up from Lynchburg to visit our program and see what we did and
Great.
learn about how to open a behavior program. So
Mhm.
we have children who are on the autism spectrum. We have children who are labeled as ED, but our role in there is exclusively to address behaviors to keep them in the gen ed classes as much as possible.
Mhm.
In the behavior program, we also have SPED teachers, and they handle the teaching part.
Uh-huh.
And we handle the stay in the classroom part.
Right.
So that's as succinct as I can be. It's a
Uh-huh.
huge subject.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yes, so applied behavior analysis is becoming more widely used in the Lynchburg City schools. One of my former students was a teacher at Payne Elementary School, and she taught a couple classes for me as well. And she was trained in applied behavior analysis. She has since moved, but she stays in touch with me. But she's working for a company now that does training on applied behavior analysis. But she got her kind of the beginning parts of her training and information from Lynchburg City Schools. So I do know that it is a approach that the city schools are exploring more widely and trying to get a little bit more training for their teachers. And we were trying to work on getting partnering with Lynchburg City Schools to do some of that training with them, or at least allow our students to go to that training. We do a lot of workshops with Lynchburg City Schools, but then the whole COVID thing hit. So I just had a meeting this morning and we're trying to refresh some of our partnerships with them. And they're still trying to figure out what they're doing with opening of schools. So they had a big meeting today. So I should hear soon about that. But we will be dabbling a little bit more in applied behavior analysis because it seems to be pretty effective with students with emotional disabilities and students on the autism spectrum, especially the students on the spectrum who have behavioral issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. And it is based on behavior modification techniques.
Yes. Yes.
And it's seeped in Skinner. So,
It is. And Watson and Skinner.
Yeah.
It's the reason it's so attractive, and I think it works in schools, is because it is so data driven.
Yes.
We can sit down and show change or lack of change.
Right. Right.
So we can really break down problems. And a lot of the time, teachers and staff are overwhelmed by certain children, understandably so.
Right.
And so applied behavior analysis is a way to come in and put a little bit of order on top of that chaos. And we don't have all the answers right away because we do have to take a lot of data and do a lot of trial and error as far as what's motivating it and what works to change the behavior.
Right.
So, we stick around a lot in classrooms, but it is something that we then have a finished product and a pool of data and are able to create a report that parents can access and understand. Teachers, admin high up the ladder can see or see the measured change. So, and so it seems to be something that works well because it's so it puts a lot of order in chaos. So.
And it's a kind of a new term for a strategy that's been around for years, right?
Right.
I was trained. They used to call it behavior modification back in the day. So when I graduated from my undergraduate degree in special education, we used this approach, taking baseline data, and you had to take, over weeks. So it wasn't just one observation. And I did this as a classroom teacher. So if you had a child who was experiencing behavior problems, you had to collect these baseline data. You had to kind of keep track of the antecedent events. Find out what was actually going on before and after. And then your interventions also had to be carefully crafted and implemented because you wanted to make sure if the behavior was changing, you knew why. So for instance, teachers who get frustrated often try a lot of things all at once.
Yes.
And so they don't know what's the effective strategy, what's actually exacerbating the behaviors. And so they really try to work with teachers. Okay, here's the baseline data that we have. Let's try this intervention and stick to this intervention for a while. And keep collecting data on that behavior to see if the behavior is changing, because also often, and let me know if you see this, Lindsay, is that the behavior change is not going to be dramatic all at once.
Right.
You're going to see small changes. And when you have these baseline data to look at, and then you're also tracking, like say if it's the number of times the child is screaming and throwing things, right?
Right.
It might be that your baseline data show that the child exhibited this, 15 times in a 2-hour period. And then you try an intervention and it decreases to 13 times.
Right.
And then 12 times. A teacher isn't thinking about, oh my gosh, it only happened 10 times today. The teacher's still thinking, oh my gosh, this is still happening. Whereas if you look at the data, you can see, well, it is decreasing. So keep doing what you're doing, because the goal is you'll keep observing that decrease. Or if you're not seeing a decrease over a period of time, then it's time to meet and try a different intervention.
Exactly. And it helps distinguish between frequency and intensity. Like sometimes
Right.
after a really bad tantrum,
Mm-hmm.
you as a teacher, I as a teacher might feel like, oh my God, this is happening all the time. I can't stand it.
Right.
But we can look at the data and say, you know what? This was only the second time this month or whatnot. And it can help put
Right. Or it
crises.
could be, it's still happening 5 times a day, but it used to happen 20 minutes at a time, and now it's 5 minutes.
Exactly.
So even though the frequency is there, the intensity, the time has decreased. So you
Right,
have to
and
kind of look at all those factors.
Right. And we measure all those things. Like for a different child, we each child's got a different plan, and we measure
Right.
different things. We if both say frequency and intensity were of concern, we would measure both those things, and we would be able to show he's had more level 4 tantrums this month, this and such. So it's a really, really complicated or multifaceted data driven science.
Mhm.
Make a
And
lot of graphs and charts.
right.
A lot-
And it does take support outside of the teacher, right? So
Yeah.
you're really using applied behavior analysis. It's not something you as a teacher can do and have a really comprehensive approach. You need, and I think this is why school divisions are studying it closely, because it is costly. Because
It is. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just going to say teachers take some data, but they can, that is workable when it's not a very complex issue.
Right.
When it gets to be many different data points that we're tracking, you've got to have someone in there who is doing only that.
Right.
It becomes really difficult when we're in a classroom and taking data, helping the child, the teacher's trying to teach,
Right.
everybody's talking to us. So it's a lot to do, and behavior analysts are expensive because it's a lot of training. So
Right.
those schools
Exactly.
bristle with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. That's very, very true. Any questions or comments from anyone who has seen this working in the schools? Carter, have they used it at TC Miller at all? Yep. Carter, I think there's some interference because it's garbled. But okay, so you can send us a message in the chat if you wanted to say something, Carter. All right. So if there are no other comments about that, and you will learn more about working with students on the autism spectrum. I'm having internet trouble. That's okay, Carter. I figured that's what was happening. No problem. Let's go back to the English for language learners. I talked about that before, and I've noticed, since I mentioned it last time, that most everybody has an article. So I think Lindsay shared last time, right, Lindsay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so would someone else like to share just a few words, a little summary of the article that you read on working with children who were English language learners? Because you've all posted an article. Any volunteers? We know Carter can't because she's having difficulty. I think Kiesia, you shared last time too, right?
I didn't.
You didn't?
Yeah. Trying to pull it up because I honestly can't remember.
I know.
It's been a while since I did mine.
I'm trying to find mine as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
while they're searching, can anybody think of a reason why students that are English language learners would be identified for special education services more frequently than English language, that children who speak English as their native language?
Maybe teachers just assume that they know the language, but they obviously don't. So they get confused and they don't know what else to do with them, maybe.
Yeah, sometimes that does happen.
There are also cultural differences
Yeah.
and racial differences, quite frankly, that teachers can take things the wrong way or don't have appropriate expectations coming into the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Very true. And sometimes the assessments that are used are not culturally appropriate or are culturally biased. So the data that you're getting from the evaluations is not valid. So you're not testing what you think you're testing. And it comes out skewed. So the child may appear that they are dyslexic when that's not what's happening at all. Anybody get enough from their article to just share a few points?
I'll say something from mine.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I just found it. So the article that I did my review on, it was called "What Primary School Teachers Say About Their Beliefs on Teaching and Learning of English as a Second Language."
Oh, interesting.
And this was a Malaysian study. And the teachers, they sort of compared the experience to the teachers with their beliefs and their belief systems on teaching ESL. And most of the teachers more or less agreed on the sort of fundamentals, their tenets of English language learning. But the one thing that was noticeably different amongst the three teachers was how much they believe it is useful or necessary to introduce the native language in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So as having taught ESL in the past, I've also worked with bilingual ESL teachers, and I'm monolingual. I've spent time trying to learn a language, but I've never like mastered it, right? Like at least I'm like low level, right? So whenever they come to my classroom or they came to my classroom, I was speaking like just English, maybe a little Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
But this seems to be the big, I guess, debate you could say inside of the ESL community right now is how useful is it, especially with beginning language learners, to either put them through the trial, sink or swim, come to my English class and we're going to speak nothing but English, and how useful is it to introduce their native tongue as well. In my experience, I obviously am very biased. I exclusively almost used English in my classrooms, but especially with students that there's something else going on, especially younger students, perhaps also have some sort of learning disability or behavioral disability or ADHD or so forth, I can see the usefulness of also employing their native tongue as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Thank you. So I have a niece who's in Austin, Texas, or just outside of Austin, and she has a little girl who was in kindergarten, and they had an opportunity to enroll her in a bilingual class. So, and what that was, her father is Native American. From what tribe? I can't remember what tribe he's from. But anyway, but they speak English in the home, and it's not a Spanish-speaking home. So this kindergarten classroom, 50% of the children were English-only speakers, and 50% of the children are Spanish only speakers. So they speak Spanish only at home. Now, of course, the Spanish speaking children did have exposure to the English language, probably more than the English speaking children had exposure to Spanish, but it's half and half. And their hypothesis was, in doing this, what they wanted to see was that, and they teach half the day in English and half the day in Spanish. And then they pair the children together. So there's an English primary language student with a Spanish primary language student, and they're paired together and they're partners. And they work together continuously. And what they found was that the children really started to support each other and translate for each other. And then they also noticed that both the English-speaking child and the Spanish-speaking child were picking up the other language much more quickly than when they had the English-only classes for the Spanish-speaking children. Now, unfortunately, COVID hit and the school year ended. But my niece, I guess she's my grandniece, she will be in this bilingual program all the way through 5th grade. And they believe that by the end of 5th grade, they will have both groups fluent in reading, writing, and speaking the second language by the end of 5th grade. So what the parents really like about this is that the Spanish-speaking parents, right, as children get older, there's a tendency they don't want to speak their native tongue. They want to speak English only, right? Because peers become more important. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to look different from their peers. So they're really hoping that this will help maintain the second language, and then also that the English-speaking children will learn a second language fluently, which we do not do a very good job in the United States teaching our children a second language. We start typically in high school, and that's too late for most people to pick up a second language through that type of program. You'd have to, if you're that old and you don't have an interest or the motivation to really learn the language, and you have a goal that you want to, work abroad or something, most high schoolers do not retain the 3 years of a foreign language that they took after they leave. And our faculty are always complaining. I'll say, we have a student that's had 4 years of Spanish and they want to start in Spanish 101. And I have to explain to them consistently, I said, well, think about this. They're taking Spanish in 8th grade. So they finish their Spanish requirement in Virginia. You need 3 years to get the advanced diploma. So they take it 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade. So they take 3 years of Spanish, maybe a 4th year, but few take it the 4th year. Then when they want to go to college, they want to start in 101, and the college faculty look at the transcripts and think they've had 3 years of Spanish. They don't need to start in 101. They can start in a 200 level class. And I have to tell them the last time they spoke a bit of Spanish or heard a bit of Spanish was in 10th grade. That was 2 years ago. They did not retain anything, right? So we'll see how this program works. And of course, they're collecting data and doing research on this bilingual classroom. In a sense, it's bilingual, but bilingual on both sides. So I thought it was a really interesting approach to learning a foreign language and maybe decreasing some of the negative effects that we see of Spanish or foreign language learners, not English language learners, when they get into American schools, rather than just saying English only. You'll learn it eventually because you have to survive, kind of thing. So thank you. Anyone else want to share a tidbit from your article? No?